Evening. I hope that you had a phenomenal Christmas, and you might be getting another small gift. That's because yesterday President Trump signed the $2.3 trillion relief bill into law, but at the same time he asked for several revisions. Over in Nevada, there's a high school student there who is suing his school because they are conducting what he is calling ideological indoctrination. And according to a provision inside of the 12th Amendment, Mike Pence might be able to certify Donald Trump as the winner of the 2020 election on January the 6th. But what would the ramifications of that actually be? Let's talk about these stories together. This is your 2020 election update, and I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Now let's start talking about the stimulus package. Yesterday, President Trump officially signed the $2.3 trillion relief and spending bill. Along with signing the bill, President Trump also said that he will invoke the 1974 Impoundment Control Act to demand reductions be made to the amount of what he called wasteful spending. Basically, the way that law works is that if the president wants to spend less money than Congress provided for a particular program, he can ask for congressional approval to rescind some of those funds. And so here are the two things that are going to happen. First of all, President Trump is going to send back to Congress a red line version of the bill, in which item by item, he'll ask Congress to remove certain funds from the bill. And secondly, later today, which is Monday, the House will vote to increase the stimulus payments from $600 to $2,000 per person. We'll see how that ultimately works out. All right, it is now later today, and we have a bit of an update. The House of Representatives voted, and they voted in the affirmative to raise the stimulus checks from $600 to $2,000. So now the next step is for the Senate to vote on the same measure. Although the date of that vote has not been determined yet, I haven't seen anything come out about it. Although I can't imagine that it'll be after this week, because this is the last week of 2020. And so what will likely happen is sometime this week, the Senate will vote, and two possible scenarios could occur. They can either vote in the affirmative and raise the stimulus checks from $600 to $2,000, and then the measure will go over to President Trump's desk, which he'll then sign off on, or the measure will be voted down, and then we'll just get stimulus checks of $600. So regardless, we will be getting some form of stimulus check. The question is just the amount. So perhaps we'll know more by tomorrow, but thus far, that's the only update I have. So otherwise, Roman in the studio, back to you. Now, one thing that President Trump brought up before signing the spending bill was that he wanted Congress to review Section 230. Now, in case you don't know, Section 230 is the provision in our law which exempts online platforms like Google, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter from being held liable for content that's posted on it by its users. It basically treats these social media as platforms rather than as publishers. However, the Trump administration has, over the years, repeatedly said that these tech giants are not acting as neutral platforms, and that instead they are engaging in political censorship which limits conservative viewpoints and stifles free speech. For instance, just a few days ago, President Trump wrote that Twitter is going wild with their flags, trying hard to suppress even the truth. Just shows how dangerous they are, purposefully stifling free speech. Very dangerous for our country. Does Congress know that this is how communism starts? Cancel culture at its worst. End Section 230. Wow. This is how communism starts. That is a very strong statement. And actually, I want to explore that idea a little bit further. So let's talk about a case right now that's happening in Nevada. A high school senior over there in Nevada is suing his charter school because of what he calls coercive ideological indoctrination that he claims is at the very center of their curriculum, which is based on something known as critical race theory. Now, this lawsuit, which I have right here in front of me, it alleges that students in the school were told that by refusing to identify with groups that are oppressed, they were exercising their privilege as well as their role as being an oppressor themselves. Now, you might be rolling your eyes at home hearing me say that, because it sounds like something a left-wing activist throws around at a protest or on Twitter, but it's not. This critical race theory is now being taught to our children in charter schools, which, by the way, are taxpayer-funded. So what does this curriculum actually look like? Well, this student over in Nevada, who is a young man of mixed race, he's half white and half black, he said that there was a hostile classroom environment, and that while he was attending a class called Sociology of Change, which is a required course for graduation in that school, he felt discriminated against. Why? Well, let's read this ourselves. This is directly from the lawsuit, and it's a few sentences long, but I think you should really hear the whole thing out, because this is what's being taught in our schools, and I feel like you should know exactly what students are being subject to. It says, the student was required for assignments to reveal his racial, sexual, gender, sexual orientation, disabilities, and religious identities, and then to determine if parts of his identity have privilege or oppression attached to it. It says that some racial, sexual, gender, and religious identities, once revealed, are officially singled out in the programming as inherently problematic and assigned pejorative moral attributes. This young man was directed in class to unlearn the basic Judeo-Christian principles his mother imparted to him. They require pupils to unlearn and fight back against oppressive structures allegedly implicit in their family arrangements, their religious beliefs and practices, their racial, sexual, and gender identities, all of which they are required to divulge and subject to non-private interrogation. Basically, public shaming sessions. That's the only way I can think of this. And this is my favorite part right here. The teacher greeted the students every day by saying, quote, "Hello, my wonderful social justice warriors." In my opinion, this sounds like a new religion that's being forced upon our students. It's a secular religion called intersectionality. It's also called critical race theory. But another way that you can think of it is the beginning stages of communism. Because exactly what Marxism did in regards to class, this type of stuff is doing in regards to race. It's dividing people up and having them fight it out. It's an absolute travesty that this is what our children are being taught. But it's not just this one school, not by a long shot. These types of teachings are becoming so ubiquitous throughout academia as well as in our workplace environments that a few months ago, President Trump actually issued an executive order prohibiting the military, federal agencies, as well as federal contractors from promoting the divisive concepts that are part of critical race theory. So now there is a concerted effort between that executive order and lawsuits like this that are pushing back against this stuff. Now, in regards to the student in Nevada, his lawsuit is arguing that this curriculum violated his First and 14th Amendment rights. So we'll have to see how this case progresses and what the judge ultimately decides. And as the case is going to be working its way through the courts, we'll keep you abreast of any developments as they're going to be coming about. And if you want to read more about this case, including the full brief, which I would highly recommend, it goes into a lot of detail, I'll throw that link into the description box below this video for you to check out. And while you're down there looking for this link, take a moment to smash that like button. These types of videos are routinely censored by big tech. So when you smash that like button that's below this video, you are fighting back against the censorship, and you are forcing the YouTube algorithm to share this video out to potentially thousands of more people, letting the truth be known far and wide. Now let's talk about the seemingly never-ending 2020 election. Now, Rudy Giuliani, who is of course President Trump's lawyer, said that election-related lawsuits are going to blow up after Christmas, which is, I guess, starting this week. In a podcast from just a few days ago, here's what he said.
Starting after Christmas, this is really going to blow up. Because the evidence that all these crooked television networks, newspapers, big tech, and the leadership of the Democrat Party have been giving you is false. And you're going to find it out all at once. It's going to be very shocking to the country.
And then after that, he went on to further say that there is considerable movement in Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin towards decertifying their election results. Now, how plausible is this to actually happen? Well, let's discuss it from two different angles. First of all, there is a new lawsuit right now that's working its way through the courts, which is seeking to block the counting of electoral votes from 5 contested states. The premise of that lawsuit is basically twofold. First of all, it argues that under Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, presidential electors must be appointed by each state in the manner that's prescribed by the state's legislature. However, in several of the swing states, there were laws enacted which unconstitutionally delegated the authority to certify these votes from the legislative to the executive branches. Secondly, this lawsuit argues that state legislatures, many of which are adjourned until January, basically next year, are being prevented from meeting and performing their certification duties. That's because in order to conduct a special legislative session, they need basically one of two things, either a supermajority or the governor's permission. However, this lawsuit alleges that the governors in these states are preventing lawmakers from meeting. And here's the question that I had when I was reading that. Given the fact that the Constitution places exclusive authority on running elections into the hands of state legislatures, how could it be constitutional for the governors to have the power to prevent the legislature from meeting? Now, according to the president of the Amistad Project, who is the one leading this lawsuit, he said that these states are having their constitutional rights violated. Just listen.
So the very body that is responsible for how these electors are selected can't even meet after the election up through January. So that's unconstitutional in that it's a delegation of authority to a governor of a legislative function that is not allowed.
So basically, he is saying that these states are violating the Constitution because only the state legislatures are supposed to decide how elections should be conducted. But by shutting down the legislatures and not allowing them to meet, these governors are acting essentially as monarchs. Listen.
Kings and queens shut down parliament. Governors don't shut down legislature.
Furthermore, he later added that some state officials even went further than that and have been outright hostile to these lawmakers. For example, in Michigan, the state attorney general over there considered criminal investigations as well as prosecutions for lawmakers who were seeking to investigate voter fraud and overturn the election results. Can you even imagine that? Threatening to throw lawmakers in jail because they are willing to look at and acknowledge voter fraud. That sounds like some George Orwell type stuff to me. So here's the question. What is this lawsuit looking to actually achieve? Well, here's what it's looking to do. It's seeking to prevent Mike Pence, who is of course the president of the Senate, from counting the votes from Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin until their state legislatures are able to meet and certify the votes. Now, will this lawsuit succeed? Probably not, for two reasons. The first one is that these types of lawsuits have been thrown out of court all over the country. No matter how cogent the constitutional arguments seem to be, the judges, they seem to be dismissing them left and right. And that's likely what's going to happen here. Second of all, even if this lawsuit is successful and these legislatures are able to meet, the Electoral College votes are still not likely to be decertified because in order to do that, in order to make that happen, you would still need the support from at least a couple of Democrats in each of these states, which is very unlikely. And the reason for that, among other things, is take a look at this. This is a recent poll that just came out a few days ago. And it found that 96% of Democrats believe that Joe Biden won the election fair and square. So with polling numbers like these, you are not likely to get any Democrats to flip, in my opinion at least. So given all this, is there any alternative to Joe Biden getting certified as the winner on January the 6th? Well, yes, there is. We discussed in an earlier episode how 7 states have what are known as dueling electors. Basically, in those states, there are 2 completely different slates of electors who cast their votes differently, one for Joe Biden and one for President Trump. And on January 6th, during the joint session of Congress in Washington, D.C., certain lawmakers might contest the results of a given state, and then they would have to withdraw to their quarters and decide which one of these 2 slates of electors are legitimate. However, there is something that we have not discussed before, but is incredibly critical, and that is, who is the one who is actually going to be counting these presidential electors? In order to find that out, let's look at what the 12th Amendment says about counting electoral votes. In part, it reads, "The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all their certificates and the votes shall then be counted." Okay, now what does that actually mean? On the surface, it just means that Mike Pence, who is the President of the Senate, is going to be the one to open the votes. But is there more to it than just that? Well, in order to shed some light on this topic, let's take a look at this article right here. It comes from the University of Chicago Law Journal, and it reads in part, "The peculiar phrasing of this crucial sentence of the 12th Amendment opens up the possibility of interpreting it to provide that the President of the Senate, meaning Mike Pence, has the exclusive constitutional authority to determine which certificates to open and thus which electoral votes to be counted." Wow. Do you see what this is saying here? This interpretation is saying that the 12th Amendment gives Mike Pence the exclusive authority to decide which votes to count or to not count. Basically, in those 7 states that have dueling electors, this interpretation is arguing that Mike Pence has the exclusive authority to decide which ones are legitimate. But this here is not an isolated analysis. This is not a one-off. Here's, for instance, another article. It's called "Nobody for President," and it makes an even stronger case that the natural reading of the 12th Amendment grants the opening and counting power to the President of the Senate exclusively. It reads in part, "The 12th Amendment provides that in the presence of the 2 houses, the President of the Senate, who is of course Mike Pence, shall open all their certificates from the electors. But as history shows, there can be more than one purported certificate from a state, meaning dueling electors. Indeed, multiple purported certificates may be the most common cause of dispute." Now let's pause here for a second. That's exactly what we have in those 7 states at the moment. We have a situation of dueling electors, where basically there are 2 sets of electoral votes that were cast, one for Joe Biden and one for President Trump. So who's going to be able to decide which sets of votes are legitimate and which are not? Well, let's continue to read this analysis. In order to know which certificates to open, the President of the Senate must know which of competing slates of electors were validly appointed. A natural reading of the 12th Amendment thus indicates that in one especially important context, the dispute is to be resolved by a single individual. Neither House nor Senate is given any authority over the President of the Senate, again meaning Mike Pence, when it comes to opening their certificates. And Congress, by statute, may not control the exercise of this constitutionally granted authority any more than it may tell the President who to pardon. Now this is huge. If this article is correct, if this interpretation is correct, that would make Mike Pence the most powerful man in America right now. Now here's the question though. Would Mike Pence actually open and count the alternate electoral votes and certify Donald Trump as the winner? I'm not sure. While these interpretations of the 12th Amendment say that he does have the authority to do that, doing so might cause an actual civil war. Because if you remember, right here, this poll found that 96% of Democrats believe that Joe Biden won fair and square. So what's going to happen? I have no idea. But I wanted to share this with you to give you a different context for what might go down on January the 6th. Regardless, President Trump has now invited his supporters to come protest in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, saying, quote, "Be there, will be wild." Is this scenario what he might be referring to? Who knows? Let's see what happens. Regardless, I'll be there on January 6th reporting live from the ground. Let me know in the comments below this video what you think about all this. Is this interpretation of the 12th Amendment correct? Do you think it's feasible for Mike Pence to actually certify Trump as the winner? And if he does, would you support him in doing so? And if you're interested in reading more about these analysis, I'll throw all the links in the description box below this video for you to read for yourself. Read through them. Maybe you'll come to a different conclusion. That's the beauty of this country. Without being censored, we can read all of the original documents and make up our own minds. Now lastly, if you haven't already, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm, subscribe to this channel for more honest news and analysis delivered to your YouTube feed, and until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed and stay free.